Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, dear brothers and sisters, and welcome back to the Islamic SHAHADA channel. In the quiet slopes of California's Sierra Nevada mountains, between the small towns of Badger and Dunlap, once stood a Muslim village called Baladullah. The name means City of God. It was founded in the 1990s by a group of African-American Muslims who dreamed of building a self-sufficient, faith-based community, a place where they could live according to Islamic principles, far from the struggles, crime, and systemic injustices of urban America. For them, Baladullah was more than just a physical settlement. It was a spiritual vision, a declaration of independence from a world that had long marginalized them. They sought peace through prayer, unity through community, and dignity through self-reliance. In their minds, the Sierra Nevada offered not isolation, but sanctuary, a space where faith could shape every aspect of life, from education and family to economy and environment. Life in Baladullah was built on the ideals of simplicity and worship. Its residents wanted to raise their children in an atmosphere of morality, discipline, and faith. They grew their own food, educated their youth, and governed their own affairs. It was, in many ways, a return to the prophetic model of living close to nature and close to God. The founders believed that a truly Islamic society could exist in America, not through politics or protest, but through example. Yet, as of 2025, that vision no longer stands. Baladullah has vanished from the map. The land is silent, the buildings gone, and the once lively community now a forgotten chapter of American history. What was once called the City of God is now only remembered through scattered archives, news clippings, and the memories of those who once called it home. But the story of Baladullah is not simply about the rise and fall of a small village. It represents a much larger struggle, the struggle of African-American Muslims to define freedom on their own terms. For centuries, Black Americans have searched for spaces of autonomy, from freedmen's settlements after the Civil War to black towns during segregation, and later, Muslim communities seeking spiritual and social renewal. Baladullah stood within that long continuum, part of a collective effort to create a life outside the reach of systemic oppression. After the tragedy of September 11, 2001, America entered a new era of suspicion toward Muslim identity. What had once been viewed as an idealistic spiritual experiment suddenly became a subject of fear and investigation. Media headlines portrayed Baladullah as mysterious and dangerous, linking it, often without evidence, to extremism. Law enforcement agencies began to monitor the community, and public opinion turned against it. In the eyes of many outsiders, the dream of a peaceful Muslim village became a perceived threat. In the decades that followed, scholars and researchers began to revisit this narrative. Studies from institutions like Stanford University and the University of California, Berkeley, have revealed a more nuanced truth. They describe Baladullah as one of the most ambitious Muslim communal experiments in modern America, not a radical enclave, but an early model of sustainable, faith-based living. Residents practiced education reform, community welfare, and environmental stewardship long before these ideas became mainstream. In this light, Baladullah's collapse was not merely an internal failure, but a reflection of a nation still struggling to accept Muslim self-determination, especially when led by African Americans. The story of Baladullah forces us to ask deeper questions about belonging, faith, and freedom in America. Why are independent Black Muslim initiatives so often met with fear? And what does it say about a society that celebrates freedom in principle but fears it in practice? Today, in 2025, the lessons of Baladullah remain profoundly relevant. As America continues to wrestle with racial inequality, Islamophobia, and social fragmentation, the story of this lost Muslim village challenges us to rethink what community means and what it costs to build one rooted in faith. Baladullah was a dream that sought to reconcile Islam and America, race and spirituality, faith and freedom. Its founders believed they could live as Muslims, fully and freely, on American soil. In the end, their vision was silenced, but their question remains: can a community truly live by its faith in a society that misunderstands it? They called it Baladullah, the city of God, a place born from devotion, destroyed by suspicion, yet never entirely forgotten. Its echoes still linger in the mountains, reminding us that faith, no matter how fragile, always leaves a trace. To understand why Baladullah existed, we must first understand the people who built it, and the deep social and spiritual forces that led them there. The story of Baladullah begins long before the 1990s. It is rooted in the experience of African Americans, a people whose faith and identity have been shaped by centuries of struggle, survival, and spiritual reawakening. In the decades following the civil rights movement of the 1960s, a new generation of Black Americans faced a difficult reality. The dream of equality, though legally recognized, had not yet transformed their daily lives. Urban neighborhoods were collapsing under poverty, drugs, and violence. Many felt abandoned by the very system that had promised them justice. In this environment, Islam began to emerge not just as a religion, but as a revolution of the soul. For many African Americans, Islam offered discipline, order, and purpose, a moral structure in a world that seemed morally adrift. It also offered dignity, a reminder that Black identity could be sacred, not stigmatized. Movements like the Nation of Islam had already planted the seeds earlier in the century, with figures such as Elijah Muhammad and Malcolm X awakening pride and self-respect among millions. But by the late 1970s and 1980s, Islam among African Americans began to change. Under the leadership of Warith Deen Muhammad, the son of Elijah Muhammad, many followers moved away from the Nation of Islam's separatist ideology and embraced mainstream Sunni Islam. This transition was profound. It meant reconnecting with the global Muslim community, the Ummah, while still confronting the realities of race in America. But it also created tension. How could Black Muslims live authentically within a system still marked by inequality? For many, the answer was to build their own spaces, not to separate from America entirely, but to create a corner of it where Islam could thrive without compromise. During the 1980s and 1990s across the United States, small rural Muslim enclaves began to appear. In South Carolina, Virginia, Pennsylvania, New York, and California. These communities were often founded by African American converts seeking refuge from urban decay and systemic racism. They dreamed of self-sufficient villages rooted in Islamic values, where families could educate their children, grow their food, and live in peace. Baladullah was part of this larger wave. It was one of several Muslim settlements established under the influence of networks like the Muslims of America, MOA, a group founded by followers of a Pakistani Sufi teacher, Sheikh Mubarak Ali Gilani. The MOA's vision was simple yet ambitious: to live as Muslims in rural America, guided by spirituality, service, and self-reliance. However, in the eyes of law enforcement and intelligence agencies, these communities were often seen differently. Reports from the early 2000s linked some enclaves, including Baladullah, to an organization known as Jama'at al-Fuqra, which U.S. authorities alleged had connections to criminal activities in the 1980s and 1990s. But such connections were never conclusively proven, and for the vast majority of residents, these claims were not only false, they were deeply insulting. Most who lived in places like Baladullah saw themselves not as militants or radicals, but as families in search of a better life. They prayed 5 times a day, homeschooled their children, and tried to embody Islam's principles of justice, community, and peace. To them, the move to rural life was not political. It was spiritual. It was an act of hijrah, a migration away from corruption and toward purity, echoing the Prophet Muhammad's own journey from Mecca to Medina. In interviews conducted between 2020 and 2024, Former residents describe Baladullah as a place of hope. One recalled, "We wanted to build something righteous, something that our children could inherit with pride." Another said, "We didn't want to run from America. We wanted to redefine what being Muslim in America meant." But despite these intentions, the broader social context of the time was not kind to such experiments. The 1990s and early 2000s were decades of growing fear around Islam, long before and especially after the events of September 11th, 2001. The rise of terrorism-related anxieties meant that Muslim autonomy, particularly among African Americans, was easily conflated with extremism. Scholars in 2025 now recognize this as part of a broader historical pattern. Whenever African Americans sought independence, whether economic, political, or religious, their efforts were often met with suspicion. From Black Wall Street in Tulsa to the MOVE organization in Philadelphia, self-reliance was seen as defiance. Baladullah, though peaceful in intent, became part of that same misunderstood lineage. By looking back through this lens, Baladullah's founding was neither mysterious nor radical. It was a continuation of a centuries-long journey, one that stretched from the plantation fields of the American South to the mountains of California. It was the expression of a deep desire to live by faith, free from oppression, and to find God in one's own way. Baladullah began to take shape in the mid to late 1990s, emerging from the vision and leadership of a small but determined group of African American Muslims. Central to its founding was Khadija Ghafoor, born Deanna Moten in Alabama, who, along with her husband, became the driving force behind the community's establishment. Their goal was ambitious: to create a self-sustaining Muslim village where families could live, pray, and educate their children in accordance with the teachings of the Quran, far removed from the social ills and violence of urban America. In 1989, Ghafoor and her associates acquired approximately 440 acres of land in Tulare County, California. This property had a complex history. Previously, it had served as a rehabilitation camp and had been associated with the controversial Synanon organization. The site's relative isolation in the Sierra Nevada foothills made it attractive for those seeking privacy and autonomy, yet it also presented challenges in terms of infrastructure, accessibility, and community integration. The founders envisioned a multifaceted community. At its core were Islamic households grounded in religious discipline and family values, a place for spiritual growth where residents could escape the destructive cycles of drugs, crime, and poverty that plagued many American cities. Education was central to this vision. Around the year 2000, the community established Gateway Academy, a charter school in nearby Fresno, designed to provide children with both religious instruction and secular education. The school represented an attempt to integrate the ideals of faith-based learning with public educational structures, a bold experiment in Islamic pedagogy in rural California. At its peak, Baladullah's population fluctuated between 100 and 400 residents, according to multiple historical accounts. The village comprised simple homes, communal areas, and spaces for prayer and study. While the community was relatively small, its aspirations were significant: to model a sustainable Islamic society that could thrive independently in a challenging environment. In the early years, Baladullah was perceived by some local residents as a closed, insular community, yet largely peaceful. Many neighbors described it as quiet and orderly, a group of families quietly pursuing a lifestyle alternative to that of surrounding towns. Its isolation, however, also fed suspicion. Outsiders noted unusual security measures and the community's reluctance to invite visitors, which in later years would contribute to misunderstandings and media scrutiny. Despite these challenges, Baladullah represented a unique experiment in faith-driven self-determination. Its founders sought not only physical independence, but also social and spiritual sovereignty. The village embodied an ideal that many African American Muslims had long sought: the ability to live in accordance with their beliefs without interference from external societal pressures. In retrospect, Baladullah's founding is emblematic of a larger historical phenomenon. It illustrates the recurring desire among marginalized communities to establish spaces of autonomy, especially when traditional social and urban structures fail to provide safety, opportunity, or dignity. The village's existence, brief as it was, demonstrates both the potential and the vulnerability of such endeavors. By 2025, scholars and historians have begun to reinterpret Baladullah not as an anomaly or an outlier, but as a significant chapter in the broader story of Islam in America, particularly within African American communities. Its establishment reflects the intersection of spiritual aspiration, social necessity, and cultural resilience. While Baladullah would ultimately face pressures that led to its decline, its founding remains a testament to the enduring human desire to create a community rooted in faith, purpose, and self-reliance. Life in Baladullah was, at first glance, deceptively simple. Residents lived in modest cabins and trailers scattered across the rolling hills of Tulare County. Families followed a strict schedule of prayer, Quranic study, and household duties. Children attended an internal educational program designed to blend religious instruction with basic academic subjects. The community maintained small-scale agricultural activities, growing vegetables and tending livestock, while residents took part in regular Dhikr and Islamic study circles. Daily routines were structured around faith, family, and communal responsibility, the pillars upon which the village was founded. Yet beneath this orderly exterior, the reality of life in Baladullah was far more complex. Its remote location, while offering isolation from the social ills of urban centers, also presented significant practical challenges. Residents had limited access to public infrastructure, including roads, healthcare, and emergency services. Jobs were scarce within the community, forcing some members to travel long distances for employment, often at the risk of exposure to a society that misunderstood their way of life. Internally, the village was highly structured, with strict rules governing social behavior, gender roles, and daily interactions. While this system was intended to preserve discipline and spiritual focus, it also created tensions, particularly among younger residents. Some adolescents and young adults reported feelings of isolation, confusion, or frustration, citing the lack of social freedom and limited opportunities for personal exploration. In many ways, the community's very success in maintaining discipline and separation from the outside world became a source of internal strain. Externally, Baladullah's insularity fostered suspicion among neighbors and local authorities. Reports describe a secretive village in the mountains. Residents conducted patrols, maintained fences, and sometimes carried firearms for protection and training. Neighbors occasionally reported hearing gunfire from training areas or seeing controlled movements around the community perimeter. These observations, combined with limited transparency, contributed to a growing perception of Baladullah as a mysterious or potentially dangerous enclave. It is important to note, however, that the majority of residents did not advocate violence or militancy. Their intentions were primarily spiritual and social, to create a safe Islamic environment where families could thrive. Nevertheless, the gap between Baladullah's internal ideals and external perceptions widened over time. The community's self-imposed boundaries, while designed to maintain religious integrity, clashed with societal expectations and fueled misunderstandings. The balance between idealism and reality was fragile. On one hand, Baladullah offered a sanctuary of faith, a model of disciplined, family-centered Islamic living. On the other hand, its geographic isolation, strict internal codes, and opaque structures limited opportunities for engagement with the broader society, leaving residents vulnerable to both social alienation and scrutiny. Baladullah's first years were marked by hope, discipline, and a quiet pursuit of faith. But by the early 2000s, the community faced challenges it could not have fully anticipated. The cracks that would ultimately contribute to its decline were not only internal, they were amplified by the pressures of external scrutiny, fear, and the shifting social climate in America. The turning point came in March 2001, when a member of Baladullah was arrested on charges of transporting firearms from New York to South Carolina. While the incident involved only a single individual, it quickly became a symbol of suspicion, raising questions about the village's purpose and practices. Later that year, in August 2001, a shooting incident occurred in Fresno involving a former Baladullah resident. This event intensified local concern and drew further attention from law enforcement. Though the vast majority of the village's residents had no involvement in violence, these isolated incidents painted a distorted image of the community in the eyes of outsiders. The tragic events of September 11, 2001 changed everything. Overnight, all Muslim communities in the United States were cast under a shadow of heightened suspicion. The federal government expanded surveillance, media coverage became more sensational, and public perception of Islamic life in America shifted dramatically. Baladullah, with its secluded location, internal security measures, and communal lifestyle, became an easy target for scrutiny. Official records, including the Congressional Record, specifically noted Baladullah in discussions about national security and radicalization. The village's association with the Muslims of America, MOA, and the influence of Sheikh Mubarak Ali Gilani were repeatedly highlighted. Reports framed these connections in ways that often blurred lines between spiritual networks and militant activities, creating a climate of fear and misunderstanding. Media narratives exacerbated the pressure. Local and national outlets began to publish sensationalized stories, depicting Baladullah as a secretive or potentially dangerous enclave. Headlines emphasized guns, isolation, and connections to foreign spiritual leaders, rather than the day-to-day lives of families striving to live peacefully according to their faith. As a result, Baladullah's reputation suffered, and residents faced increasing social and economic isolation. Financially, the community struggled. Donations and support from sympathetic Muslims outside the village declined, as fear of association with perceived extremism grew. Socially, families felt the weight of scrutiny. Their children questioned why outsiders viewed their lives with suspicion, and elders worried about maintaining the community's spiritual mission in an environment that now saw them as a threat. This period illustrates a broader tension in post-9/11 America. The challenge of balancing national security concerns with the rights of minority religious communities to live according to their beliefs. Baladullah was emblematic of this struggle. Its members were neither extremists nor criminals by the vast majority of accounts. Yet the very traits that had defined the community, isolation, discipline, and faith-centered governance, were reframed as indicators of danger. By 2025, historians and social scientists view this period as a critical moment in the story of Baladullah. The village, once a symbol of spiritual hope and African-American Muslim self-determination, had now become entangled in national anxieties, surveillance programs, and media sensationalism. These pressures were not merely external inconveniences, they eroded the village's cohesion, reduced its financial stability, and contributed directly to its eventual dispersal. Baladullah's experience after 9/11 is a cautionary tale. It reveals how a community dedicated to faith and family can be misunderstood, misrepresented, and ultimately destabilized by the fears of a society that conflates difference with danger. Yet it also underscores the resilience and courage of those who tried to maintain their way of life, even when the world outside became increasingly hostile. As Baladullah entered the early 2000s, the community faced mounting pressures that would ultimately challenge its very existence. These pressures came from multiple directions: social, financial, and administrative, creating a complex web that the village's founders struggled to navigate. One of the most critical stress points was Gateway Academy, the charter school founded by Khadija Ghaffar in nearby Fresno. Designed to educate children within a framework of Islamic values while meeting state educational standards, the school soon attracted scrutiny from state auditors and regulators. Investigations revealed discrepancies in the management of public funds. According to official reports, over $1.3 million in public charter school funds could not be accounted for. Whether due to administrative mismanagement, accounting errors, or inadequate oversight, these findings had severe consequences. The credibility of the school, and by extension the Baladullah community, was called into question. As legal actions intensified, authorities began targeting other aspects of the village's operations. Property holdings, community organizations, and financial assets came under investigation. Some residents perceived these measures as disproportionately harsh and influenced by Islamophobia and racial bias, viewing the community not just as a subject of administrative oversight, but as a Muslim enclave under suspicion. The combination of scrutiny and isolation placed immense stress on both the leaders and the general population. The consequences were tangible and immediate. Access to vital infrastructure disappeared. Gateway Academy was closed, cutting off the community's central educational institution. Offices and organizations associated with Baladullah were dissolved or liquidated. Without financial stability, social support, or educational continuity, the village struggled to maintain cohesion. Families began to leave, seeking safety, opportunity, and stability elsewhere. This period highlights a critical challenge faced by intentional religious communities, especially those formed by marginalized groups: the delicate balance between autonomy and accountability. While Baladullah's founders sought independence to live according to Islamic principles, the mechanisms of American governance, regulations, audits, and legal oversight intersected with broader social biases, creating pressures that small, isolated communities often lack the resources to withstand. By 2025, historians and scholars studying Baladullah view this phase as a decisive turning point. The collapse was not solely due to internal mismanagement or failure of vision. It was also the result of systemic vulnerabilities, a community attempting self-determination in a society quick to scrutinize, judge, and limit minority initiatives. The interplay of legal pressure, financial instability, and social suspicion made sustainability impossible. Baladullah's experience demonstrates a broader lesson for Muslim communities worldwide. Building autonomous, faith-centered communities requires not only spiritual vision and discipline, but also a deep understanding of legal, financial, and societal frameworks. Without careful navigation of these realities, even the most idealistic and well-intentioned communities can struggle to survive. By the early 2000s, the dream of Baladullah had begun to unravel. Around 2002, the community was effectively disbanded, marking the end of a bold experiment in African-American Muslim self-determination. The land, once envisioned as a sanctuary of faith and family, changed hands or was repurposed. According to historical records, portions of the property eventually became a resort, reflecting the dramatic shift from spiritual enclave to commercial use. The physical remnants of Baladullah tell a quiet, poignant story. Former homes, simple cabins, and trailers that once sheltered families now sit abandoned or have been converted for other purposes. The mosque, the heart of communal worship, stands as a faded structure, its minaret and prayer spaces largely empty. Gateway Academy, the charter school that embodied the community's educational vision, has long since closed, leaving only traces of chalkboards, classrooms, and playgrounds. These physical relics, though dilapidated, serve as silent witnesses to a community that once dared to imagine an alternative way of life. For former residents, Baladullah is more than a collection of buildings or acres of land. It represents a lived experience, a chapter of spiritual growth, communal effort, and personal development. Many recall the early mornings of prayer, the lessons taught in small classrooms, and the sense of safety and purpose that the community provided. Even in its decline, Baladullah left a lasting imprint on the lives of those who called it home, shaping their understanding of faith, family, and self-reliance. Scholars and historians studying African American Islam increasingly recognize the significance of Baladullah. In the 2020s, archival materials, interviews, and academic research have brought new attention to the village as a case study in rural Muslim communities in America, a subject often overlooked in mainstream histories of Islam in the United States. Researchers highlight Baladullah not as a failed enclave, but as an example of the aspirations, challenges, and resilience of African American Muslims attempting to live faithfully and autonomously in the modern American landscape. Baladullah's legacy is multifaceted. On one hand, it is a cautionary tale of how social suspicion, legal pressures, and financial mismanagement can undermine even the most devoted communities. On the other, it is a testament to vision and courage, the willingness to establish a space where faith, family, and communal values could guide every aspect of life. In 2025, Baladullah exists primarily in memory, archives, and scholarship, yet its story continues to resonate. It reminds Muslim communities worldwide that the pursuit of spiritual autonomy, though fraught with challenges, is a noble endeavor. It encourages reflection on the balance between isolation and engagement, tradition and modernity, idealism and practical reality. The mountains of California no longer echo with the call to prayer that once rang from Baladullah's mosque. Yet the spiritual and social imprint of the village endures. For those who lived there, for scholars documenting African American Muslim history, and for the wider Muslim American community, Baladullah remains a symbol of aspiration, resilience, and the complex interplay between faith and society. By 2025, Baladullah is being reassessed through a more nuanced and scholarly lens. For decades, the community was primarily remembered in the context of controversy, media sensationalism, and post-9/11 suspicion. Today, however, researchers and historians are examining the village as an important chapter in the history of African American Islam and rural Muslim life in the United States, uncovering insights that were previously overlooked. Leading universities, including UC Berkeley and Stanford, are framing Baladullah within the concept of spiritual decolonization. This perspective emphasizes how African American Muslims were not merely creating isolated enclaves for safety or escape from urban challenges. They were actively constructing alternative spaces in which faith, autonomy, and communal identity could flourish. Baladullah is increasingly recognized as an intentional and spiritual community, rather than a radical or militant outpost, reflecting a deliberate effort to live according to Islamic principles in a self-determined environment. New studies also contextualize the challenges that Baladullah faced. Issues such as isolation, limited economic resources, and external scrutiny were not unique to the village, but mirrored the struggles of other marginalized communities attempting self-governance. The added factor of Islamophobia and racial prejudice amplified these difficulties, contributing to misunderstandings and stigmatization that shaped both public perception and governmental response. Researchers argue that such external pressures were central to Baladullah's decline, highlighting how social bias and structural challenges intersected with internal vulnerabilities. The physical legacy of the village has also been transformed. Archival research and real estate records indicate that the former Baladullah property has been sold or repurposed, often converted into resorts or commercial sites. While the land no longer serves its original communal or spiritual function, its presence continues to act as a tangible reminder of the community's aspirations and historical significance. These changes underscore the evolving relationship between spiritual spaces and social reality, showing how material legacies can persist even as original intentions are altered. From the reassessment of Baladullah, several lessons emerge that remain relevant to Muslim communities seeking autonomy today. First, transparency and effective governance are essential for the sustainability of intentional communities, particularly when interacting with broader legal and civic frameworks. Second, extreme isolation, while protective of spiritual ideals, can create vulnerability to external scrutiny, surveillance, and misperception. Third, strong spiritual ideals alone are insufficient. Meaningful integration with the surrounding social and economic environment is crucial for long-term survival and impact. Finally, Baladullah reminds us of the importance of reframing Muslim American history. The story of communities like this one should be told as one of resilience, faith, and cultural creativity, not solely through the lens of extremism or failure. Ultimately, the reevaluation of Baladullah in 2025 highlights both the aspirational and cautionary aspects of intentional Islamic communities. It underscores the need for balance between faith and practicality, autonomy and engagement, idealism and adaptability. While the village itself no longer exists, its legacy continues to inform how Muslim communities across the United States and the world understand the challenges of creating spiritual, self-sustaining spaces within complex social landscapes. Baladullah's story, revisited, is no longer just about a lost village in the California mountains. It is about the enduring quest for faith, autonomy, and identity, offering insights that remain profoundly relevant in the 21st century. Thanks for watching until the end. I hope it was useful. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.